I'd like to take this opportunity to share insights that I've gained with the hope that it prompts you to reflect on your own learning as well. Throughout this journey, I encountered a number of things that I did not know or that challenged my assumptions or things that I thought that I knew. First, I discovered I had a lot of preconceived ideas about fear and how the brain responds to fear. When I came to this in-depth study about 9 months ago, I held a version of the reptilian brain model in my mind. I've heard it referenced most of my adult life, and to be honest, I never questioned it. Well, I never gave it much thought at all. I was aware of a lot more recent findings and discoveries from my own personal journey and the process of leaving the Army and returning to civilian life, yet somehow, despite this knowledge, I was still holding this reptilian brain concept in the background in my thinking. For me personally, the moment I actually questioned it, it quickly fell apart. And I realized that I'd been holding onto this misconception for so long simply because I never questioned my assumptions. I must have learned it or studied it, this idea, years ago, and it went into the box of things that I know. Even after learning about the incredible ways the brain can rewire itself, it's interconnected at a level that quite frankly, we barely understand. And it does all this in fractions of a second continuously. It never once occurred to me to question or examine my old ideas and understandings of the brain. Now, you may have noticed I did use the reptilian brain phrase, several times throughout this presentation. In doing this project, I did question using it. However, I did make a conscious choice to go ahead and use it, mainly because it's so prevalent in society. Now, my hope is that you decide for yourself whether or not it's an outdated model. I have found this to be the best way to unlearn something, especially something that we've believed our whole lives. Coming at someone directly and telling them that you believe a lie just kind of creates confrontation and resistance to learning. And I certainly don't respond well to it, not in a positive, open, and receptive way. I don't think anyone does. Now, it might appear to be a contradiction, but I did deliberately choose to use it as a metaphor simply because it is so common and familiar. I wanted this material to be approachable and understandable, and using pop cultural references and inferences seemed to be the best way to do that. In my own life, the hardest thing I have ever learned was how to unlearn something first. My hope is that by using the words reptilian brain, it actually helps us all to unlearn it. Second biggest thing I learned through this process was all related to just exactly how complex the brain really is. Many neuroscientists will tell you that it's the most complex thing in the universe. A single human brain is estimated to have 2.5 petabytes. That's 2.5 million gigabytes of memory capacity. And if we were to map the human brain, it would require something called a zettabyte, which is a trillion gigabytes. Now, within the brain itself, there are 100 billion neurons, and each is thought to have about 10,000 connections to other neurons, numbering those connections into the trillions. And according to new research that came out in October 2023, while I was doing this project, they discovered there are more than 3,000 different types of cells just within the human brain. Way, way, way more than they ever previously thought. Now, the human brain itself weighs about 3 pounds in the average adult. It's about 60% fat, and the remaining 40% is a combination of water, protein, carbohydrates, and salts. The human brain is not a muscle. It doesn't feel pain. And it's the largest vertebrate brain relative to its body size found anywhere in nature. And as much as we think we know about the brain, there's even more that we just don't know. I was surprised to learn that it's really only been the past 20 years that technology has really opened the doors in exploring the physical brain. That's not even mentioning the developments in psychological research about how we think, perceive, decide, and choose, what we believe and how we remember things. These functions are still somewhat of a mystery. We may know what regions and nodes are involved, but why they work exactly the way they do, well, that still kind of confounds us. And there's nothing as confounding as much as the study of emotions. Now, we've gained a lot of great insights, but once again, there's much that we just don't know yet. Most surprising of all is perhaps the brain's ability to make new connections, to rewire itself, and to learn and unlearn, and to adapt. Finally, I was astonished by just how much fear influences and touches every part of our daily lives. Now, I had an idea, which is what led me to do this topic in the first place. From my own personal experiences in dealing with and living with my wartime experiences, I have a pretty good idea of what and how much fear can influence and shape and mold my day. But during the study, I was kind of shocked to see how much it's involved in just ordinary daily life. I now see that fear motivations are much more common than I thought. And that helped explain a lot of other people's actions and behaviors. Mostly, stuff that's happening subconsciously and subtly. It's striking just how unaware most of us are about how fear motivates our behaviors. I certainly was. And this brings up a critical point. Just how much we don't understand fear. Ignore it, overgeneralize it, or how we typically stereotype it. When you hear the word fear, without thinking, what's your first response? Does the word fear make you think of hysteria, screaming, panicky, shaking uncontrollably? Or does it elicit an image of tension, freezing, holding your breath? What mental image do you get when you hear the word fear? What other words do you immediately associate with the word fear? Is it terror or apprehension? Is it scared or startled? Is it anxious or unease? Because we have all these preconceived ideas, biases, and stereotypes about fear, it can make it difficult to recognize the symptoms of fear being triggered. Now, in the military, I often got yelled at because, quite frankly, that's just what people in authority in the military typically do. And although I didn't think about it or really realize it at the time, it did trigger a fear response in me at some level. Triggered is also kind of a loaded word, but I'm not going to go into that here. The point is, when I got yelled at, I had some sort of a level physical induced reaction, putting me on a path towards fight or flight. We simply usually call that stress. Tension in my body and maybe an increased heart rate, shutting down some of my higher brain functions and ability to think rationally and clearly. And as I reflect on this, I come to realize just how often I experience stress, not only in the military from people yelling at me, but in grocery stores, gas stations, or even the bank. Yelling voices in the background. Someone slamming a door in anger or stomping out of a business. Even though it had nothing to do with me, I would still feel the stress from that situation. We all do, and we usually don't know or at least appreciate just how much it does affect us. Other people's stress becomes our stress, and we're wired that way. In prehistoric times, if we heard yelling and screaming, it probably meant our tribe was being attacked by another clan or a predator had made it into our camp. We must get ready to fight or flight. There's no other alternative to life and death. Unfortunately, we haven't yet figured out how to tell our subconscious, anxious Andy, that the guy yelling at the teller because his bank account is lower than what he expected is not, in fact, a saber-toothed tiger in camp trying to eat us. Now, the more I learned about fear, the more I realized how much it runs the world. I would even argue that it's not love or money that makes the world go round, but it's fear. Fear makes the world go round. Our societies, even our cultures and our beliefs, and what we believe and why we believe it, a lot of it's based on fear motivation. Bottom line, unexamined fears can run our lives. Examine our fears, explore them, analyze them, even inventory them. Knowing what our fears are takes them out of the driver's seat, as it were, and helps us to have a little more control over ourselves, our choices, and our actions. Otherwise, anxious Andy is driving, and we may not like where he takes us.